I never thought my life would fall apart because of one phone call, but that's exactly where it all started. I was sitting at my desk on the 27th floor of a skyscraper in central London. The office felt like an aquarium, cold, glassy, with perfectly even rows of monitors and faces tired from Excel and endless reports. I worked at Langford and West, a large consulting firm where people prided themselves on how much coffee they drank in a night and how many hours they went without sleep. No one talked about sympathy, empathy, or humanity there, just KPIs, deadlines, and bonuses. My name was Ryan. I was 32. I was a team lead, managing a small group of analysts. The job was exhausting, but I thought it was all for stability, for the future, for my mom, whom I promised I'd one day buy a house by the sea. That call caught me off guard. On the screen, Mom, I smiled. "Hey, Mom," I said, still staring at the monitor. But instead of her usual warm voice, I heard a stranger's trembling. "Mr. Harper, this is from St. Thomas Hospital. Your mother, we have bad news." The world shrank to the sound of her breathing on the line. I heard nothing but that silence, filled with horror. "Mom died, heart attack, sudden, no chance." I remember sitting on the office floor, feeling my legs give out. Colleagues fussed around, someone poured water, someone patted my shoulder. But in my head, only one phrase echoed. I didn't get to say goodbye. A day later, I called my boss, Oliver, the managing partner. He was ageless, always perfectly pressed suit, impeccable smile, and a cold gaze like someone who sees people only as numbers. "Oliver, I need to take a couple of days. Funeral," my voice trembled. "It's Mom." "I understand," he replied curtly. "But you know we're in reporting season. The project will stall without you. How much do you need a day?" "A couple, maybe 3, I said, feeling anger rise inside. "Fine," he said. "I can approve one day. The rest is on you." It's a funeral." I couldn't believe my ears. "I'm really sorry for your loss, Ryan, truly. But business doesn't wait." I went anyway. Even if it cost me my job, I couldn't do otherwise. The funeral was quiet. A small cemetery by the coast, fresh sea breeze, and old family friends. I stood by the coffin, looking at the white lilies, and thought that now it was like the support had been knocked out of me. Mom was my only real close person, and all I had left was guilt that I wasn't there when she passed. 3 days later, I returned to work. The office greeted me with silence. No one said a word. Only Oliver, passing by, tossed, "Hope you rested." I sat down silently. My badge didn't work. Access error. I went to IT. They exchanged glances, said it was by management's order. And then I realized I'd been fired. No call, no letter, no explanations. Later, HR sent a short message. "The company has decided to terminate cooperation due to unauthorized absence from the workplace." I sat at home, clutching that piece of paper, feeling everything crumble. 10 years I'd built a career, nights without sleep defending projects, working holidays, and it all ended because I went to my own mother's funeral. I wrote a post on LinkedIn. Without anger, just told the truth. How the company fired an employee for going to say goodbye to his mother. A day later, it went viral. Thousands of comments. "This is disgusting. I worked there. They're really like that. Hang in there, bro." Oliver didn't expect the story to break out. But while the internet boiled with outrage, he just stayed silent. And for the first time, I felt like I hadn't opened my mouth in vain. Later, one of the partners called, said the company was ready to settle the issue. Money, a recommendation letter, a small compensation if I deleted the post. I refused. My mom didn't deserve her memory being traded for checks. But back then, I didn't know that this was just the beginning. What I thought was rock bottom was only the entrance to a tunnel that's not so easy to escape. My post went viral, but with it, I became an object of hate. People started accusing me of playing the victim, wanting hype, all for attention. HR from other companies rejected me because you have a bad reputation, you're conflict prone. The world I knew cracked even more. Sometimes I still hear her voice. Ryan, don't forget who you are. I haven't forgotten, Mom. I just now understand that in a world where people value reports more than life, you have to decide for yourself who you want to be. I never wanted to become a news hero. I just wanted someone to say, this is wrong. But the internet is a strange place. It knows no middle ground. It either makes you a victim or a monster. 2 days after my post went viral, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, former colleagues, people I didn't know, some wrote words of support, some outright hate. Couldn't you just warn your boss? Typical whiner, fired for a reason. Another sensitive millennial. I read the comments, feeling something break inside. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a villain. I was just a person who lost his mother and job in 1 week. That evening I sat by the window. Outside, rain turned the city into a blurry watercolor painting. On my phone, hundreds of notifications. On the laptop screen, a message from Oliver. Ryan, your post has drawn unwanted attention to the company. If you don't delete it by week's end, we'll sue for defamation. I reread that message dozens of times. Defamation. I just told what happened. Every word was true. The next day, a letter came from Langford and West's legal department. They demanded public apologies. Otherwise, a lawsuit. I was paralyzed. I wasn't ready for this. I had no money, no lawyer, not even the emotional strength. I went to Luca's, a former colleague, the only one who really showed sympathy. We met at a bar near the office where I used to spend evenings after work. Everything seemed the same there. The same music, the same burnt-out bulbs, the smell of coffee and alcohol. Damn, Ryan, he said, shaking his head. I heard what they did to you. It's disgusting. They're threatening a lawsuit, I replied, clutching my coffee cup, for telling the truth. Lucas smirked. That's Langford and West. They always operate through fear. The key is don't back down. But if they really sue, I can't afford lawyers. He looked at me seriously. Then tell more, let everyone know. I thought about it. The idea sounded crazy, but something inside me had already clicked, that feeling when you're backed into a corner and all that's left is to go forward. A day later, I posted the second part of the story, not as a complaint but as fact. Screenshots of emails, HR letters, internal orders where I was fired for unauthorized absence. I didn't name names, didn't mention specific surnames, but those who worked at the company knew everything without words. The post exploded, 100,000 likes, thousands of comments. Journalists from The Guardian and BBC News wrote to me. And then silence, not a single call from office friends, no support from former colleagues, just emptiness. On the third day, an unknown number called. Ryan Harper, asked a cold voice. Yes. We're from the legal department. This is an official warning. You violated the confidentiality agreement. I didn't sign anything like that. You signed the employment contract, clause 14.2, the voice turned steely. And if you don't stop spreading false information, we'll start the process. My mother died, I said quietly, and you fired me because I went to her funeral. That's not a lie, that's a fact. The court will decide what's a fact, the voice said and hung up. After that, the real nightmare began. My name appeared in search engines. People on forums wrote, that guy from LinkedIn complaining about his mom. Some threatened. Some offered help in exchange for interviews. I stopped sleeping. At night, I wandered the apartment looking at an old photo of Mom on the wall. She stood by the sea, laughing, wind tousling her hair. I spoke to her mentally. Mom, I didn't want it to turn out like this. On the fourth day, Oliver messaged me again. Ryan, I'm giving you one last chance. Delete the posts, apologize, and maybe we'll forget this incident. I replied shortly, no. An hour later, a letter came from The Guardian. Ryan, we'd like to tell your story. It'll be anonymous, but people need to know what's happening in corporate culture. I agreed. A week later, the article came out. Headline: Employee fired for attending his mother's funeral, the price of corporate loyalty. It went viral in Europe. I got hundreds of emails from people who'd been through the same. Nurses, teachers, programmers, all wrote the same. I was fired when I lost a loved one. Thanks for speaking the truth. But with the support came fear. The company launched a counterattack. They accused me of spreading false information, published an official statement calling me undisciplined and emotionally unstable. And I realized they were trying to destroy my name. My phone stopped ringing. HR agencies went silent. Every interview ended the same. Sorry, but you're too toxic a case for hiring. I was no longer just Ryan. I was that guy who fought with a corporation. One evening when I'd almost resigned myself, Lucas called. "Ryan, turn on the news, now." I turned on the TV and froze. BBC was showing a story. Langford and West accused of systematic pressure on employees and labor rights violations. I saw the familiar building, the same 27th floor where my desk once stood, and an interview with an anonymous employee confirming everything I said. Oliver came under investigation. The company tried to hush it up, but it was too late. A week later, their office emptied. The scandal went beyond the country. Investors left, clients terminated contracts. I should have been happy, but instead I felt only emptiness. Mom always said, "Revenge doesn't bring peace, son. Only justice makes the pain a little quieter." I didn't know if I'd achieved justice, but I knew for sure I wasn't the person who once feared losing his job. That evening I went to the sea, where Mom and I used to walk when I was a kid. The wind hit my face, waves whispered something ancient, eternal. I said quietly, "Mom, I did what I could." And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to cry, not from anger, not from fear, just because I finally let go. When I returned to the office the next Monday, everything seemed colder. No one looked me in the eye. My desk, once piled with files and coffee mugs, looked like someone else's workspace. Clean, sterile, unwelcoming. I'd been absent for just 3 days. 3. But in corporate time, it felt like eternity. As I sat down, I noticed a small note stuck to the monitor. Meeting with HR 10:00. No greeting, no condolences, no welcome back. Just a reminder that in this place, grief is an inconvenience. When I entered the HR office, my manager Caroline was already there, arms crossed, lips tightly pressed, as if physically holding back sympathy. "Ryan," she said, "we need to discuss your recent behavior." "My behavior?" I asked, confused. "You mean going to my mother's funeral?" Her jaw tightened. "It's not about that specifically. It's about your communication style and reliability. You didn't notify us properly about the absence." I blinked, trying not to snap. "I sent 3 emails and called you directly before leaving." Caroline exchanged a glance with Paul, the HR rep, who was flipping through printed letters. "Yes, we received 1 email," Paul said quietly, "but there was no formal vacation request in our system." "I was in the hospital, watching my mother die, Paul," I said softly. "I wasn't thinking about internal portals." Caroline's tone sharpened. "We understand it was a difficult time, but everyone has procedures. When you don't follow them, it affects the whole team." I felt my throat tighten. "You're saying I'm being punished for burying my mom?" Silence. Caroline's eyes slid to her notes. "We're issuing an official warning for unauthorized absence. Sign here." She pushed the paper across the table. I looked at it, then at her, then at the paper again. It was surreal, like the world had shifted sideways, and I was in a parallel universe where compassion doesn't exist. That evening, I sat in my car in the company parking lot long after dark. The building glowed above me like a glass monolith, sterile, perfect, indifferent. I'd worked there for 10 years, Late nights, weekends, missed holidays. I'd helped launch million-dollar projects. And now, my career was crumbling because I dared to grieve. I called my sister. When she answered, I couldn't even speak, just sat shaking. "Ryan," she said softly, "you don't owe them your soul. You did the right thing. Mom would tell you to leave." I laughed bitterly. Leave? From what? The mortgage, health insurance, all the stability. Silence hung on the line. Then she said, "Then make them regret it." In the following weeks, the office atmosphere worsened. Caroline started excluding me from key meetings. Emails I used to get now went to others. My duties were quietly redistributed. One morning, I arrived and found my badge didn't work. Security had to manually check access. The guard looked at me with that awkward, pitying gaze people reserve for someone already half out the door. By noon, I got an email from HR. Subject: termination of employment. After internal review, we've determined that your recent behavior violates the company's attendance policy. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. No call, no meeting, just an email. I sat staring at the screen, numb. My hands shook as I reread it, trying to grasp the absurdity. I lost my job, not for stealing, not for failing, not for lying, but for attending my mother's funeral. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit, then realized I had nowhere to go, no morning meeting, no calendar reminders, just silence. And that silence was worse than any punishment. Days passed, then weeks. I tried applying elsewhere, but when recruiters asked why I left my previous job, I didn't know what to say. Unprofessional grief, that's not a resume bullet. Bills piled up, savings dwindled, sleep was ruined, but beneath all that fatigue, a slow rage smoldered. They didn't just fire me, they erased me. Then one afternoon, something shifted. I was scrolling LinkedIn out of habit when I saw a post from Caroline. She was smiling in the photo, holding a glass of champagne, captioned, "So proud of our team for another record quarter. Leadership is about setting standards." Something inside me broke. 10 years of loyalty, erased by a fake smile and corporate hashtags. I opened email and started writing. Not to her, not to HR, to a journalist I knew from a tech blog. We talked once about burnout and mental health in the industry. He gave me his card. The subject I typed: how I lost my job for attending my mother's funeral and how my company covered it up. It took 3 weeks for the story to come out. By then, I'd almost convinced myself to back out, but when it appeared, it spread like wildfire. On Reddit's front page, thousands of comments. People shared their stories of corporate cruelty and grief. The company's name was everywhere, in trends for the wrong reasons. Employees started leaking internal chats, revealing how management discussed me as a burden. Caroline's bland LinkedIn posts were screenshotted and shared on forums. Sponsors began distancing themselves. The PR team panicked. And me, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. But corporate revenge is never clean. A few weeks later, I got a letter from the company's lawyers, full of legal jargon and veiled threats about defamation. They wanted me to retract the story, clarify that it was a misunderstanding. I didn't respond, because it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the truth, and truth doesn't owe them silence. Months passed. The noise eventually died down like all scandals. The company moved on, so did the internet, but I didn't. I still wake up at night, half expecting that HR email. Still look at my phone, waiting for a meeting reminder that never comes. Losing my job didn't just ruin my career, it shattered my sense of belonging. Because I realized something cruel. In corporate life, you're never family. You're an asset until you become inconvenient. A few weeks ago, I visited my mother's grave again. The grass had grown neat and green. The air was calm. I sat and whispered, "I did it, Mom. They can't erase me." And in that silence, I felt pride and grief intertwine, like two halves of one broken heart. That day I left without a job, without a title, without false stability, but with something better, a backbone. And maybe that's what she always wanted. I lost my job for grieving, but when I publicly exposed my boss, everything changed. Strange how silence can be louder than any crowd. After my story went viral, I thought I'd finally feel freedom, justification, like I'd reclaimed something stolen from me. But the truth is, freedom feels empty when it comes after loss. For a few weeks, I lived in the echo of attention. Hundreds of messages flooded my inbox, strangers thanking me for speaking out, sharing their own horror stories from the corporate world. At first it was nice, like I hadn't shouted into the void for nothing, but soon the messages changed. Recruiters who ignored me before suddenly wanted to connect. News outlets asked for interviews. Podcasts invited me to talk about resilience. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, not me, just the story. Because in this world, even pain has a PR cycle. Then came the call. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a familiar voice spoke. "Ryan, this is Paul from HR." I froze. He cleared his throat, calling unofficially, "There's something you should know." I said nothing, just listened. "The company's been in damage control mode for weeks," he continued. "Caroline's on indefinite leave. Lawyers are sorting the mess. But here's the thing, they're considering a settlement offer to you, to close it quietly." I laughed dryly, bitterly. So now they suddenly care. Paul hesitated. "Ryan, they just want to move on, and you should too. This offer could set you up for a while." "How much?" I asked. He paused. 150,000. For a second I couldn't breathe. $150,000. That's more than half a year's salary, enough to pay off debts, maybe restart life. But then I asked, "What's the catch?" "The usual, sign an NDA, delete the post, agree not to talk about the company anymore." There it was, the hook. They weren't offering peace. They were buying my silence. That evening I sat in my apartment with the TV off, lights dimmed, the letter open on the kitchen table. I stared at it for hours. $150,000, a way out of this mess, a reset button. But every time I thought about signing, I saw my mother's face. The way she looked at me when she said, "Never let people tell you your pain doesn't matter." I poured myself a drink and another. By midnight, I was drunk enough to talk to shadows. "Mom," I whispered, "what would you do?" Silence answered me. The next morning I opened Reddit. My story was still there, still being shared, still alive. I scrolled the comments, some kind, some mean, some cynical, and one stopped me. "I worked under Caroline too. She ruined my life. Thanks for speaking out." I stared at that comment for a long time, because suddenly it hit me. If I take the deal, if I delete the post, I'll erase that person's voice too. So I shut down the offer, deleted the lawyer's email, and chose the harder path. 2 months later, the fallout completed its circle. Caroline's name leaked in connection with the incident. The company released one of those polished, soulless statements about reviewing internal policies. HR pretended to care. The board shuffled, but deep down I knew nothing had really changed. I was still unemployed, still checking my account before buying groceries, still waking at 3 a.m. from dreams where I'm back in the office, hearing the click of fluorescent lights. That's the part people don't talk about, the after. You expose injustice and the world applauds for a week, then moves on. You don't. One afternoon, I was in a cafe downtown sipping cheap coffee when someone sat across from me. I looked up. It was Sarah, one of my old colleagues. "Ryan," she said softly, "I didn't think you'd want to see anyone from the office." "Almost don't," I admitted. She smiled sadly. "Fair, but I wanted to thank you. You should know, because of your post, several of us filed complaints too. Now it's all under investigation. Caroline's gone for good." I blinked, processing. You're serious. She nodded. You started something, Ryan, really started it. I didn't know what to say. Gratitude, relief, pride, but all I felt was fatigue. When Sarah left, I sat there for a while watching people rush by outside. Suits, laptops, smiles like masks. It struck me how fast life moves, barely leaving room for grief. We just keep clocking in, pretending we're fine, hoping no one notices the cracks. I pulled out my phone and opened my post again, the one that started it all. Over 1 million views now, tens of thousands of comments. But as I scrolled, something new caught my eye, a message request. From a woman I didn't recognize. Hi Ryan, sorry for what happened to you. I'm a producer from a documentary team. We cover workplace injustice stories. Open to chatting. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to say yes, keep telling the story, make it matter. But another part, the quiet, broken one, just wanted to rest. Stop reliving the same pain for clicks and applause. I didn't respond, just locked the phone and sat breathing. 6 months passed. I found freelance work, nothing glamorous but enough to make ends meet. Some days are good, some aren't. There are mornings I wake grateful I stood my ground, and others when I regret not taking the money and vanishing. But the truth is, both paths hurt. There's no happy ending when the system is built to break you for being human. A few nights ago, I was going through my mother's old things. Letters, photos, a few trinkets she kept. At the bottom of the box, I found a note she wrote me when I was 16. The paper yellowed, but her handwriting still clear. You don't need to be the strongest, Ryan. Just stay kind, even when it costs you. I sat in silence for a long time, then smiled, a small, painful smile. Because maybe that's the point. Maybe grief isn't something you leave behind. Maybe it's what you carry, a weight that reminds you you're still human in a world that punishes humanity. The story never really ended. The company rebranded a few months later, pretending to start fresh. Caroline vanished from LinkedIn, Paul quietly quit, and I moved on, not healed, not a winner, just older, wiser, tired in a way that doesn't pass. Sometimes I still dream of that office, endless screen glow, typing sounds, fake smiles. But in those dreams, I always see my mother at the door. And she says the same thing every time. You did the right thing. When I wake, it still hurts, but it hurts less, knowing I didn't sell her memory for silence. My boss fired me for attending my mother's funeral. HR called it unprofessional grief. I went public, exposed the company, and watched it burn. They tried to buy my silence, I refused. Now I live with less money, fewer friends, and no illusions. But at least I sleep at night.